Next on the news, a solemn procession from Brooklyn to Manhattan. Catholics observing Good Friday led by Bishop Robert Brennan.
It's a journey made alongside Christ as he walked to Calvary, where he would be crucified. I'm Jessica Easthope with The Way of the Cross.
Then this, playing it safe, what the Vatican is doing to make sure the Pope stays healthy for Easter. And the exhibit that's bringing you closer to Christ, the interactive tomb that's teaching people about the sacrifices Jesus made. Plus, it's a popular part of Easter, but do you know the history of the Easter egg? We'll give you its backstory and how it illustrates Christ's resurrection. I'm Christine Persichetti. Currents News starts right now. Jesus' final hours recreated from Via Dolorosa across the Brooklyn Bridge. The Way of the Cross is a spiritual journey. Catholics walking with Christ toward his crucifixion and carrying a cross as he did on the most solemn day of the Sacred Triduum. Currents News' Jessica Easthope was there every step of the way on a very real journey for people in the Diocese of Brooklyn. Jess.
Christine, Jerusalem on the day Christ was crucified and Brooklyn have more in common than you'd think. Just as people mocked Christ as he walked through the streets of the city to Calvary, people stopped to point and laugh as a procession of thousands recreated his last steps. But just as many joined in. It's a display of faith like no other during the liturgical year. Catholics from the Diocese of Brooklyn and beyond joined Bishop Robert Brennan as he led the Way of the Cross, a procession from the Cathedral Basilica of St. James to downtown Manhattan.
As we walk with him, we remember his suffering and his death, but we also remember that he walks with us always.
Every walk of life trekked through tourists, joggers, and onlookers over the bridge, professing their faith and standing with Christ during his last moments. Archbishop of New York, Cardinal Timothy Dolan, says Jesus was betrayed and needed friends.
Jesus needs company at his time of need. He wants people to walk with him, because all he was encountering was a lot of hate and a lot of lies and a lot of violence.
This today, really brings it home to me in terms of Lent, 40 days, Easter, Holy Week.
Donna Demarir, a parishioner at St. Patrick's Church in Bay Ridge, decided this year it was time for her and her 3 children to participate in the Way of the Cross.
I feel really blessed. I don't know what it's gonna be like, how long we'll be able to walk, but I'm really happy to be here.
Nancy Polidor, a parishioner at Holy Family Church in Canarsie, says the Way of the Cross is part of her Lenten sacrifice.
God suffered a lot for us, so that's a pleasure for me to follow the cross, and do all that's the way that I can prove my gratitude for God.
Ahead of the procession, people gathered at St. James for the first station of the cross and readings. They sat shoulder to shoulder during the solemn service, facing a bare altar, a reminder of Christ's death and presence in the tomb.
Good Friday doesn't have the last word. Easter Sunday does. God has the last word, not Satan. Good, not evil. Life, not death.
Christine, after the procession finished, many came back here to St. James for the Liturgy of the Lord's Passion, which includes a reading of the scripture, a veneration of the cross that was carried over the Brooklyn Bridge, and people can receive communion, not from Mass today, but Eucharist that was consecrated yesterday.
Yeah, Jess, why is it that Mass is not celebrated on Good Friday?
Christine, one of the reasons Mass isn't celebrated on Good Friday is simply it's the most solemn day of the liturgical year. It's a day that is meant to be for mourning and sadness and us feeling the weight of our sins that were placed on Christ's back as he died for us. And so it's a time to reflect on his crucifixion, and the absence of a celebration, a real celebration of Mass, kind of highlights that and also prepares our hearts for the glory that awaits us on Easter. Christine?
Thanks, Jess. And just a note to everyone watching, that procession is only part of Currents News extensive Holy Week coverage. If you can't make it to church this weekend, you can still be a part of everything leading up to Easter by sticking with Net TV. Here's what you need to know. The Easter Vigil with Bishop Brennan will be televised Saturday at 8 p.m. And on Easter Sunday, 3 live masses will be celebrated in 3 languages, a 9 a.m. Creole Mass and 11 a.m. English Mass, which will be celebrated by Bishop Brennan. and a 1:30 p.m. Spanish Mass. There will also be a 4 p.m. Italian Mass and a 5 p.m. Polish Mass for those who wish to celebrate in those languages. Over at the Vatican, a shakeup in the schedule. For the first time since he was released from the hospital last week, Pope Francis will not be presiding over a Holy Week service. Kelsey Gussie is in Rome and has the story, plus a preview of the Way of the Cross at the Colosseum.
Typically on Good Friday, the Pope celebrates the Stations of the Cross here at the Colosseum. But tonight, due to the intense cold weather, Pope Francis will follow the event from his home at Casa Santa Marta at his residence in the Vatican. The tradition of the Stations of the Cross in the Colosseum dates back to the 18th century as a unique way of commemorating the Passion of Jesus in the Eternal City. At each station, there is a reflection on a theme or a topic relevant in the world, such as war, the family, the environment, and dialogue. Tonight, Pope Francis chose the theme Voices of Peace in a World at War for the focus of the Stations of the Cross. The meditations are testimonies the Pope heard from his different papal trips and other events. They will be narrated by people from around the world who have faced injustice, including a West African migrant, a priest tortured during the Balkan War, and a South African mother and survivor of guerrilla bombing. Though Pope Francis will not be physically present here for the Stations of the Cross, he expressed his prayers and solidarity for everyone who will be present here at the Colosseum. In Rome, Kelsey Gussie, Currents News.
The Stations of the Cross were not the only service changed due to the Pope's health. Hours before, the Pope presided over the celebration of the Passion of the Lord at St. Peter's Basilica, where, unlike previous years, the pontiff was unable to lay prostrate before the main altar. Instead, he chose to remain in his wheelchair. This was also the first year since the pandemic that pilgrims could venerate the cross. In previous years, only the Pope had been allowed to do so. According to the Vatican's website, Pope Francis will continue on with the rest of Holy Week as planned. On Holy Saturday, he'll celebrate the Easter Vigil, and on Easter Sunday, Francis is scheduled to celebrate Mass and give his Urbi et Orbi blessing. Now to a news alert on what's being called, quote, very volatile times for Palestinians and Israelis. Protests, fighting, and police raids have been building up as the Holy Land is on high alert in and around Jerusalem. Laura Aguirre has more.
Israeli bombs exploding on the Gaza Strip and in southern Lebanon Friday, aimed, Israel says, at Palestinian militant targets. The strikes came hours after dozens of rockets were launched from southern Lebanon into Israeli territory. A former U.S. ambassador to Israel points to a larger international adversary.
This series of events has the feel of kind of a coordinated assault by the network of proxies and terrorist organizations that Iran sponsors in the region.
The rocket attacks come amid rising regional anger over Wednesday's Israeli police raids at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, one of Islam's holiest sites. Scenes of the police beating Palestinian worshippers widely condemned by the Arab and Muslim worlds. Israeli police say they were pursuing, quote, hundreds of rioters barricaded inside. Neighboring Jordan accuses Israel of threatening regional stability.
What Israel is doing right now is pushing all of us into the abyss of violence, making it very difficult for us to continue to engage in peace talks.
Former Ambassador Shapiro disagrees.
Now Israel has the responsibility to defend itself, and it has strong support from the United States to do so.
We want to de-escalate. I mean, there's a very, very sensitive weekend ahead with Passover, Ramadan, and Easter all aligning, and we're hoping for a quiet weekend.
Laura Aguirre, Currents News.
A suspect has been arrested in the Queens shooting of rookie police officer Brett Bowler. Described as a transient, 22-year-old Devin Spraggins is accused of shooting the officer after a fight broke out over a seat on an MTA bus. The department says a lot of work went into finding him and that officers rushed in to help after hearing one of their own was shot.
Your adrenaline just rushes, and the anxiety when you hear police officer shot. Any police officer shot, and especially a new rookie police officer, someone whose father I've worked with for 15 years, knowing his son was out there doing the job and getting shot. I think every police officer just feels that rush to get out there and help and do what they can. And in this case, particularly the amazing work the Detective Bureau did and with Force Investigation to put this together in a short time but it's very difficult to describe an incident where you hear officer shot, and there's just so many emotions that go through you when that happens.
Officer Bowler, who was shot in the hip, is recovering at Jamaica Hospital after having successful surgery on Thursday. We are praying for his speedy recovery. There's a lot more news headed your way. The Diocese of Brooklyn celebrates the Mass of the Lord's Supper as Bishop Brennan washes the feet of parishioners. Teaching by showing, the interactive display that's bringing people closer to Christ. Also, the little-known facts on why Easter eggs are part of a long-running tradition. Bishop Robert Brennan washes the feet of his parishioners just as Jesus washed the feet of his disciples, and the sacred Triduum begins. A centuries-old church tradition, the Mass of the Lord's Supper on Holy Thursday begins the Easter Triduum, and the faithful chosen for this sacred ritual in the Diocese of Brooklyn say it's an honor and a privilege. Holy Thursday is a solemn night for all Catholics, but for Ramila Carnati of Brooklyn, it's also an emotional one.
I really value this ritual, so happy to be a part of it.
The parishioner at the Cathedral Basilica of St. James was asked to get her feet washed by the bishop during the Mass of the Lord's Supper, continuing a tradition started by her grandfather decades ago in India.
It is an emotional night. In fact, I had messaged my parents and my family back home in India, and they were just super proud of this moment.
A moment Bishop Robert Brennan says is a call to service. He says as we enter the sacred Triduum, we commemorate the Last Supper when Jesus gathered with his disciples and gave the gift of himself.
So we remember the gift of the Eucharist and the gift of the priesthood, which he gave to the church that very night. But we also remember his example of kneeling to wash the feet of his disciples and the ways that he instructed them, what I've done for you, you ought to do one another.
At the end of the Mass, the bishop processed around the church carrying the Blessed Sacrament in reverence to an altar of repose where the faithful could spend time in Eucharistic adoration.
It really makes you pause and reflect on that moment and how you can take that forward in your own life.
The cathedral remains open later than usual on Holy Thursday, so everyone could stay for adoration in front of the Blessed Sacrament. Good Friday marks Christ's death on the cross, and at an interactive Easter exhibit in Queens, you can reflect on his sacrifice in a whole new way. This is an interactive tomb made by the Director of Religious Education at St. Pancras Church in Glendale. Every year, the parish depicts Christ's passion on Calvary and the tomb where he was laid to rest inside the church. You can even see Jesus' body laying in mourning right there. Currents News spoke to the pastor of St. Pancras, Monsignor Stephen Aguja, who says the exhibit has struck a chord with parishioners from there and beyond.
I've seen people come into the tomb and come out crying. Not for bad reason, but because they're really contemplating what this means. And their reactions are just overwhelming. People do come, and people are even coming from other parishes because they hear about it and they want to come and see.
On Saturday evening, Christ's body will actually be removed from the tomb to represent his resurrection. In his place, different decorations such as lights and flowers, plus an empty shroud. Want to walk through the tomb yourself? You're invited. Just head over to St. Pancras Church in Glendale, Queens. The address there is 72-2268th Street. Again, that's in Glendale, Queens. Another Catholic church has been vandalized, this time in Corona, California. A statue of Mary was smashed at Corpus Christi Catholic Church last weekend. A parishioner is trying to refurbish the piece while police try to track down the suspect who was caught on camera. The church's pastor, Father Fidel Rivero, said, quote, "We just pray for him. We don't know what his motive was. We ask God to forgive him for whatever he did." Over in our nation's capital, we're getting a sneak peek of the White House's Easter decorations. On display are beautiful arrangements of butterflies hung from ceilings and some decorative eggs made by students across the country. It's fitting that students played such a key role in the decor. That's because the big egg roll competition, which is set for Monday, will teach nearly 30,000 children about farming, eating healthier, exercising, and more. Let's talk about the price of those Easter eggs for a second. As Sunday approaches, more people are opting for plastic ones because the price of a carton just keeps going up. Inflation has the average price of eggs at $4.82. But there's hope this Easter. The latest jobs report shows the labor market is cooling, and that could chill inflation. Ivan Rodriguez has the story.
U.S. employers added 236,000 jobs in March, coming in below expectations, a labor market cool down that could actually be a good sign.
The Fed isn't going to publicly say we want job losses, but I think the Fed knows, and all the economists are there that know that if the unemployment rate stays at 3.5%, you're not likely to calm or tame inflation.
Industries like leisure and hospitality, healthcare and government continue to lead the way in job gains. The job losses are coming from sectors like manufacturing and construction. Still, the labor market has remained stubbornly resilient. The unemployment rate dropped to 3.5%. Average hourly earnings grew 0.3% from the month before. And the cool down in hiring may not be enough to stop the Federal Reserve from raising interest rates again next month.
Inflation is extremely high, and it's hurting the working people of this country badly. And we are taking the only measures we have to bring inflation down.
The Fed is aiming to engineer a soft landing for inflation, but it's a difficult tightrope to walk.
My guess is that the process of bringing down inflation will bring on a recession at some stage, as it almost always has in the past.
Ivan Rodriguez, Currents News.
We have another train derailment to report. It happened Thursday morning in Sioux City, Iowa. No word on a cause. Union Pacific, which owns the train, apologized for the mess and says it's fixing the lines and train cars as fast as possible. Local police say the derailment could have been a lot worse.
We know that the rail cars were southbound. We do not believe that there is any contents in any of the cars. All are believed and are in the process of being confirmed as empty at this point.
The Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, has been criticized lately after a number of train derailments across the country, most notably the accident in East Palestine, Ohio, which caused toxic substances to leak from train cars. Still to come on Currents News, while the chicken or the egg debate continues, one thing that's not questioned, the history of the Easter egg. We'll tell you about it in just a few minutes. Also, sweet to look at and eat, the peeps that were turned into works of art. Do you have a story idea or want to share a tip? Email us at newstips@desalesmedia.org or call our 24-hour number, 718-517-3122. We'll be right back. At this, the Pennsylvania event is being taken over by an iconic Easter treat. The Peeps in the Village is an art show encouraging creativity in the community. Celebrating the 4th annual exhibition, guests will find 130 marshmallow masterpieces, from the hot hair balloon to home peepo. And besides sparking creativity, the event is also boosting tourism.
There are people who traveled far and wide to come and see this Peeps display, and nothing makes us happier than to be able to offer something that is truly enjoyed by members of the public.
To enter this Peeps show, enthusiasts can submit their work in one of 3 categories: diorama, sculpture, or wall art. The only rule, every submission must be made with and inspired by Peeps. This Easter exhibit will be running until April 23rd. So creative. And Peeps aren't the only works of art when it comes to Easter. Soon, colorful eggs will decorate homes across the country. But did you know that Easter eggs are not only an iconic symbol, but can be traced back to the very first Easter to illustrate Christ's resurrection? Currents News' Andy Madison finds out how a red egg hatched into an international tradition.
The Easter egg might be a more commercialized tradition now, but its roots date all the way back to the first Easter.
Easter egg has a lot of historical symbolism with the resurrection of Christ, new life, fertility, and it's been used in the church for a very long time, since ancient times. They're associated with the whole church and really a symbol of the resurrection, and so that's why we kind of think about them when we think of Easter Sunday.
So much so, that tradition has it Mary Magdalene started the tradition on the first Easter day. While there is some confusion about the real story, many say she used it to illustrate Christ's resurrection to Emperor Tiberius Caesar in Rome. He exclaimed that Jesus had no more risen than the egg in her hand was red. Suddenly, it miraculously turned red to validate her statement. Thus began the tradition of dined eggs, and even the disciples began to exchange eggs on Easter Day to remember this miracle.
This is a wonderful tradition that Christian families can continue today, especially by incorporating ancient Christian symbols that we see in the catacombs or other great pieces of church architecture onto the eggs, so that even children can learn the deeper meaning of these Christian symbols.
So this year, instead of all the colorful eggs, maybe it's best to dye the Easter eggs red, as a symbol of this miracle that took place about 2,000 years ago. Andy Madison, Currents News.
Here's a fun Easter egg stat for you. According to Wallet Hub, 180 million eggs will be purchased for this year's holiday in the U.S. Hopefully people are stocking up on those egg coloring kits. I better hit the store on my way home. And just a reminder before we go, if you can't make it to church this weekend, you can still be a part of everything leading up to Sunday by sticking with Net TV. Here's what you need to know. The Easter Vigil with Bishop Brennan will be televised Saturday at 8 p.m. And on Easter Sunday, 3 live masses will be celebrated in 3 languages, a 9 a.m. Creole Mass, an 11 a.m. English Mass, which will be celebrated by Bishop Brennan, and a 1:30 p.m. Spanish Mass. There will also be a 4 p.m. Italian Mass and a 5 p.m. Polish Mass for those who wish to celebrate in those languages. And that is Currents News. I'm Christine Persichetti. Thank you for joining us, because we are putting your faith in the news. We are leaving you tonight with one more look at the Diocese of Brooklyn's Lenten Pilgrimage, a 40-day journey of faith where pilgrims visited churches throughout Brooklyn and Queens in preparation for Christ's resurrection.
So you're right there.
I was super excited. It came very spontaneous, but I was very excited about it because I'm from Brooklyn and I grew up in East New York, Brooklyn, so it's home. And it's always good to come back home.
I was really excited because I've just been hearing about the revival that's been going on in the diocese, and I was feeling very grateful to have a moment to be a part of that.